It's well known that the United States exports billions of dollars worth of arms to its allies. What isn't as widely understood is that many of the guns it sends into wars in the Middle East are Soviet-era munitions manufactured in Eastern Europe. So how do these supply routes function, and where do the weapons go? In the first of a special two-part investigation into US arms sales, Juliana Rufus has been to investigate.
What's happening with your party? I don't want to make a deal with him. You know that he's a crook.
I think he is. I think he's the mafia, or the mafia is controlling him.
June 2007. Efraim Diveroli, a 21-year-old arms dealer from Miami Beach, is negotiating a $300 million ammunition purchase for the US Pentagon. His Albanian contact, Kosta Trebitska, is secretly recording the conversation. He wants to prove Diveroli knows that the seller has links with organized crime.
The problem is I don't have a choice. The U.S. government's expecting the product.
The United States needs weapons for its allies in the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. The guns must be Kalashnikovs and other Soviet-style weapons. It's what its allies are used to. Speed is of the essence. A year after the call with Diveroli, Trebitska is dead. Many believe the Albanian mafia silenced him to stop him from speaking up about a Pentagon deal gone bad. Trebitska's death gave rise to a scandal that was supposed to change how the American government buys weapons to arm its allies overseas. But the question is, has it? We've set out to investigate just how these weapons find their way into some of the most fragile states on Earth. This is David Pakouz. He used to be Diveroli's business partner. The story of how the two young amateurs from Miami Beach turned into international arms brokers was so incredible that it became a Hollywood blockbuster. They supplied the Pentagon with 40-year-old Chinese ammunition that was stored in Albania.
I'm barred from doing any business with the U.S. government. I'm on a watch list.
But Chinese weapons were under U.S. sanctions, so they repackaged the ammo to hide its origin. In 2011, after a New York Times expose, Diveroli went to jail, but Pakouz got away with house arrest.
So you guys didn't really have a background in that. You were just two young guys in their 20s.
Yeah.
Why did you get contracts to supply arms?
You mean, why did they give us the contracts? Well, they gave us the contracts probably because we were very, very competitive. We were what they called the best value to the government.
Pakouz says the War Dogs movie failed to tell the whole story. He insists the Pentagon knew all along that he and his partner were supplying sanctioned Chinese ammunition. His claim is supported by documents that surfaced in court.
They kept on taking deliveries, I think like 3 deliveries a week of full aircraft loads of ammunition for like 4 or 5 months after they found out it was Chinese.
Pakouz says the Pentagon was happy with the arrangements until the media got hold of the story.
How important was it for the US Army to get quick supplies?
Operational necessity is a term that the military used when they wanted to say that they gotta get this done one way or another. And that meant that they were willing to overlook certain procedures and rules and safeguards that the administration had put in place.
Pakouz says it's this operational necessity that drives the US government to employ private companies.
It allows them to be one step removed because a lot of these suppliers in Central Europe and the Eastern Bloc may not have great reputations. They may have supplied other people, that have committed atrocities, if they only deal with U.S. companies who go out and then do their own deals, and then the U.S. government could wash their hands and say, well, we didn't know where it was coming from.
Fast forward to 2015. America is supporting another war in the Middle East, but in Syria it's supplying arms to rebels, not to state forces. Again, the weapons are Soviet-style, easy to use, and so common in the region, they're hard to trace if something goes wrong. When ISIL-controlled territory expands, US arms supplies are stepped up.
I'm pleased that Congress have now voted to support a key element of our strategy, our plan to train and equip the opposition in Syria so they can help push back these terrorists.
This is exclusive footage of what one of the Pentagon's secretive projects looked like. Again, the US government uses private companies to arm and train its allies.
Put your legs on the outside.
These men are highly experienced warfighters Mike Doherty and Francis Novillo.
Firing!
They were in Bulgaria to train on Soviet-style weapons that would be supplied to Syrian rebels. It seemed like a straightforward mission, but it would cost Novillo his life. Francis Novillo is survived by his wife Rijeka and 2 young children.
Hi, Rijeka?
Yes.
I'm Juliana. Hello.
She has agreed to meet us.
Thank you.
We're joined by Mike Doherty, Novillo's training partner. He was present when Novillo was killed.
I was about 5 or 6 feet away, and as he approached the launcher, he literally raised the round, and as soon as he started to slide it in, and it detonated. And that's when everything just went white for me.
Francis died instantly, cerebral and chest.
Apparently I was thrown into a concrete wall, and the blast effects threw me back down against the ground. And my hand was split down here and hanging, and the other hand had a big chunk of metal in it. And then I just remember looking up, and I saw our other colleague, and his hand was hanging, and his arm he just shattered or just tore up. I started to kind of flip myself over to crawl, and I started crawling towards him. Then I passed out.
The multi-million-dollar Pentagon contract to train and equip was received by a company called Purple Shovel, but it seemed to be insufficiently prepared for the task. Rijeka and Mike say there were problems right from the start.
The awarding of the contract happened very quick. There were a lot of things that we questioned. Why are we not doing medical? Why are we not doing threat briefs and things like that?
It felt very rushed. I remember Francis saying that it just felt rushed and it wasn't.
We really didn't understand the scope of what we were getting into.
Mike tells us the official investigation into what exactly happened in Bulgaria seems to have stalled. It's still not clear what caused the missile launcher to malfunction. Did the US government's urgency to supply weapons mean safety procedures were ignored once more?
It wasn't until, I would say, over a year later that we learned that the ammunition was over 30 years old. And over the last 30 to 40 years, where was it stored? What were the conditions during its storage? And were they doing the right things to ensure that it was properly taken care of? And that we don't know.
Mike and Rijeka are suing the company. Our request to Purple Shovel for an interview was declined. The company continues to receive US government contracts.
It seems like the government just wants to put layers over this contracting pool so people don't really know much about it. It's a way they can do things outside of the military that are maybe a little bit more shady and not get caught.
Meanwhile, the covert supply of weapons from southeastern Europe continues. Observers have noticed that a small airport in Rijeka, Croatia, has become a major hub for the flow of arms to the wars of the Middle East. We have come here to find out what type of weapons are sourced by the US government and how they are transported.
You can spot Croatian rocket launchers. You can spot Bulgarian Grad missiles. You can spot Serbian mortar shells.
Jelena is a member of the Balkan Investigative Reporting Network. Together with the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, they have spent 2 years tracking the Pentagon's secret weapons shipments into Syria. We have set up a joint investigation.
This one was produced in Serbia. It's a Coyote machine gun, ended up in Syrian battleground.
The US government publishes information about federal contracts online. Jelena and her colleagues have used this database to calculate the US government's expenditure on Soviet-style weapons.
Since 2015 until 2022, Pentagon will spend over $2.2 billion US dollars.
What do you know about the routes, how weapons from Balkan countries go to the Middle East?
They go through Turkey, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar and Saudi Arabia.
Okay, so that's all US allies?
US allies, exactly.
Jelena had been investigating a plane that departed from Rijeka airport 5 days earlier, which she believes carried weapons to the Middle East.
You can see it on the flight radar, the routes that this plane took several times, and you can see places such as Al-Ryan.
In Qatar.
Exactly. And also it has the flight number mark, which is very specific for the planes that are actually transporting military goods, this CMB.
This is footage of the plane Jelena tracked. It is being loaded with crates. At least 20 US military flights have left this airport in the past 6 months. And when we arrive at the airport, we too see a plane.
Whew, it's big. This is one of the busiest airports when it comes to planes such as this one.
It's from the same airline Jelena had been investigating.
But it really is pretty nuts. It's just in the middle of a traffic junction.
Yeah. They are about to take off. If there are weapons there, they're probably going to Syria. There is these huge fights that are happening in surrounding of Idlib. Yeah, they need more arms there, definitely.
Flight data proves that the majority of this company's planes from Rijeka go to key US bases in the Middle East. From there, weapons can be funneled to Syria. The single largest Pentagon supplier of weapons for Syrian rebels is Bulgaria. For the EU's poorest country, that's a change in fortune. Bulgaria's arms factories fell quiet after the end of the Cold War, but the wars in Iraq, Afghanistan and Syria brought new demand. Factories were reopened and new production lines added to supply weapons to the world's most fragile regions. We have come to Bulgaria to find out more about the weapons the US government buys for its Syrian allies. Sopot is home to state arms manufacturer VMZ. It is also where Francis Novillo was killed in June 2015. VMZ has been struggling to modernize, and Novillo's fatal accident wasn't its first incident. A series of explosions rocked one of the company's plants in the time before the contractors' arrival. There were no casualties, but production shut down for over 2 months. When we contacted VMZ to find out more, its management declined to speak to us. 2 leading trade unionists did agree to meet, but did not want to go on camera.
Not just the workers are refusing to talk to us, but even the local TV station. What we do know is that the workers at VMZ are under a huge amount of pressure. If VMZ fails to complete an order,
their bonuses are cut. With growing international demand for VMZ weapons, the pressure is on to supply as fast as the company can produce. We follow in Novillo's footsteps. His training partner Mike Doherty had told us the fatal ammunition was 30 years old, and we want to see if we can find out more.
The VMZ range where the training took place is just over there.
It's where Novillo died, but we can't stop because it's a militarized zone. Instead, we head to the warehouse where VMZ stores its ammunition. It's where the big explosions took place.
Hello. Hello.
We're told to leave immediately.
They said that it's absolutely forbidden here to shoot, and that in case if we insist, they're going to call the police.
We stop to film in a nearby village instead.
2 explosions took place there.
Local residents here were affected by the explosions.
It was so big that some houses in this village had to be evacuated.
The local police arrive within minutes. They order us to follow them to the station, where we are questioned and threatened with prosecution. It is clear that the authorities don't like any questions about Bulgaria's arms exports. But one person did manage to prove that VMZ weapons are reaching Syria. Bulgarian journalist Dilyana Gaitanzieva. Dilyana arrived in Aleppo as fighting intensified in 2016. Syrian government forces had almost cleared the rebels out of the city. In a desperate bid to defend their positions, opposition forces responded with a barrage of artillery and rocket-propelled grenades. And the Syrian regime retaliated with airstrikes. Hundreds of civilians were killed in the crossfire. The suffering Dilyana witnessed was unforgettable.
It was constant firing, day in, day night. One of the rockets fell next to us, over a mother and her child. They were beheaded in front of me.
A local journalist took Dilyana to a house that had just been vacated by the Al-Nusra Front.
This is rockets from Bulgaria. This is the basement which was used by jihadists to store huge quantities of weapons. This is a weapon manufactured by VMZ Sopot with the country of origin, Bulgaria. When local people realized that I came from Bulgaria, the first question I got was this: why are you sending weapons to kill us here in Aleppo?
After publishing her story, an anonymous source directed Dilyana to a large online stash of hacked documents. Taken together, they proved that hundreds of flights had transported weapons from Balkan states such as Bulgaria and Serbia to conflict zones. Many were paid for by the Pentagon.
At least you have any idea of who the perpetrators are.
Among the papers were end-user certificates, a kind of contract between buyer and seller. The buyers must confirm they will not transfer the weapons without informing the seller. They are a vital tool to stop the global spread of weapons.
According to the documents, the end user is the US Special Operations Command, but the weapons ended up in the hands of jihadists in Syria.
But she says the seller, Bulgaria, bears responsibility too.
When Bulgaria as a country is informed that our weapons end up in war zones and in countries which are under embargo, we should stop immediately the exports.
Since their discovery, the documents have been verified by international experts. So what is Bulgaria's position on these exports? The government declined to comment, so we turned to the only Bulgarian official prepared to speak to us.
It is possible to say that is the best limpet mice in the world.
Stefan Vodanicharov is the co-president of the Association of Bulgarian Defense Industries.
Only one of this one is possible to destroy tank and light armor vehicles.
Most of its members export arms to the Middle East, and he shows us some of the niche defense products they have developed for private and government clients. We want to know if Bulgaria is at fault when the US Special Operations Command or SOCOM, passes the weapons on.
As a member of the EU, Bulgaria is required to stick to the arms control treaties. Many of the contracts are fulfilled with the Americans putting SOCOM as an end user, but it is known that the weapons are going to Syria.
If you receive end user for the country who is with good reputation, it is impossible to say, I don't like to sell to you this. It is not responsible for Bulgaria country, it is responsible for the country who make this end user. You make the deal with the state who is good reputation. After that, what to say?
There is growing evidence that this flow of weapons is having unintended consequences. Analysts have found heavy machine guns, rockets, and even missile systems from Bulgaria and Romania in the hands of ISIL. It is now estimated that over a third of all weapons used by the group in Syria and Iraq were manufactured in Eastern Europe. So are US arms exports inadvertently empowering the terrorists? In London, a group called Conflict Armament Research carried out detailed analysis into how ISIL has obtained its weapons.
Hello. James.
James Bevan is the executive director.
The vast majority of weapons are marked. Kalashnikov, almost always, on the left-hand side of the receiver, and there you have a serial number.
Bevan spends much of his time in the Middle East, documenting recovered weapons. Most had been captured by ISIL in battle from their enemies, including weapons taken from rebel groups equipped by the US. To date, Conflict Armament Research has used serial numbers to trace 40,000 items.
These kind of transfers have introduced weapons which they didn't previously have access to, and that's a positive boost for their offensive capability. This is an RPG-7 launcher designed in the 1940s, but some of the rockets which they've acquired, ostensibly through the US Train and Equip program, are the tandem rockets, which basically converts a 1940s weapon system into something that can defeat a modern tank.
So a weapon that was supplied by the US government may well end up being pointed at US soldiers.
Yes, absolutely.
Serious blowback.
Yeah, serious blowback.
But not all of ISIL's weapons were captured in battle. A significant number were handed to ISIL by friendly fighters from US-equipped groups.
This is a missile from an anti-tank guided weapon system. Its transfer history is production in Bulgaria, gets transferred across to one of the Syrian opposition forces, is then diverted to Islamic State. We pick it up less than 2 months after it left the factory door.
Once more, it's a weapon manufactured in Bulgaria by VMZ, bought by the Pentagon via a private contractor.
If you supply weapons to non-state actors, you have very little control over what happens to those weapons, particularly in a situation like Syria.
Our request to the US Department of Defense for an interview was declined, but we did get a statement saying America's partner forces are vetted and that the final use of the weapons is checked. Meanwhile, US support for rebel groups in Syria continues. And to defeat ISIL, America has chosen a new ally.
The president authorized the Department of Defense to equip Kurdish elements of the Syrian Democratic Forces as necessary to ensure a clear victory over ISIS in Raqqa, Syria.
But Kurdish rebel forces have their own territorial interests, and a new front has opened in a region already fractured by war. In a recent escalation, two US allies, Turkey and the Kurds, have been pointing guns at one another. And more lives are taken every single day. The spread of weapons is a global problem, and even more so if exporting countries avoid accountability.